We're going to see a lot of theatre bluster, and obviously we'll have suspension, we'll have people walking out and coming back in, and we'll eventually have some sort of deal. We'll have a very beautifully crafted document, and everybody will be throwing confetti and drinking champagne and say, we did it. But the real problem, I think, is much more in the aim of the negotiations, which are essentially to have these targets that we then don't meet. And we have tried this for 18 years. We tried this in Rio in 1992, and yet we didn't complete those promised carbon cuts. We tried even harder carbon cuts in 1997 in Kyoto, and we still didn't complete them. So to believe that we're suddenly going to do this in Copenhagen undermines the fundamental point, namely that as long as it's really costly to cut carbon emissions dramatically, it's not going to happen. What we need is smarter technology.
And so given that, what's the best that you're hoping for out of an agreement out of Copenhagen?
Well, I would like us to have a very different focus here in Copenhagen, because fundamentally, as long as everybody's focused on what kind of target, is it going to be 20 or 30%? Well, if we're going to fail on those targets anyway, it doesn't really matter all that much. We should be much more focused on how much are we going to actually put into research and development into green energy. We asked some of the world's top climate economists to look at what are the smart and not so smart solutions. What they basically told us was, if you look at cutting carbon emissions now in rich countries to live up to the 2 degrees target, it's going to be phenomenally costly, and it'll actually do fairly little good. They estimated that for every dollar you spend, you'll only end up avoiding about 2 cents of climate damage. Now, if you spend it at the other end, if you spend it on some of the best ways to deal with global warming, namely investing in research and development into green energy technology, for every dollar spent, you'll avoid about $11 of climate damage. So you'll do about 500 times more good. And that's what I would like the negotiations to come out with, that everybody pledges that they're going to be spending 0.2% of their GDP on research and development.
But you're talking about research and development. A lot of people here are saying that the technology is ready to go, all we need is political will to get it up and going. So what do you say to that?
That's certainly Al Gore's argument, that we have all the technology, all we need is political will. My sense is that's a little bit like saying we could take all of Denmark to the moon. It's true that we have the technical capability of doing that. It'd just be phenomenally expensive, which is why I don't think you should expect it to happen anytime soon. We're just not there, and that's of course why it's actually really, really hard to get people to cut very much. You can cut a little, but notice how we cut a little. You cut a little by switching from coal and oil to gas. And that's a known technology, and of course we can go some way towards that, but you can only do that once.
So we're having a big debate in the moment in Australia about emissions trading schemes and whether that's the best way to go about bringing our emissions down. What do you make of such schemes?
Well, fundamentally, cap and trade, or carbon tax, or other ways to cut carbon emissions are different ways to achieve the same goal. Typically, we would tend to say that a carbon tax is economically the best way forward, simply because it's very easy, it's very clear, everybody can see it, and you don't actually have to have any sort of political fat involved. Whereas a carbon emission trading system, as we've had in Europe, very easily means that you start having big polluters cut out because you get political deals, or big organizations get a lot of the emission permits for free, which essentially means that the nation state forgoes the opportunity of raising revenue at the same time, and also creating a distortion between the ones that have strong lobbies and the ones who don't. The last way is simply to try to sort of micromanage the economy, which is probably somewhat harder to do, but potentially also has a great opportunity for doing something that's smart. It really depends, again, on whether you believe the politics are good at steering such a process.
But some people would argue that your approach you're talking about is really letting politicians off the hook from having to do anything to tackle climate change. What would you say to that?
Well, fundamentally, there's two things. It's not letting politicians off the hook. It's saying to politicians they should do something that's cheaper and much, much smarter. Now, if that means that they'll actually end up doing it, that'd be great. And of course, it'll be much greater for the climate. But also, isn't it letting politicians off the hook when we're essentially saying, oh, please do the same thing as you've done for the last 18 years, make grand promises and then not keep them? And fundamentally, this is not about, are we letting politicians off the hook, or are we doing something that makes us feel good or not? Presumably, this is about what we do to improve the climate in 50 or 100 years. And if this way to tackle climate is simply demonstratively better in the sense that it's more efficient, that has more likelihood to be implemented, and that has more likelihood to actually deal with climate change in the long run, I don't see what the problem is.
Do you think that Australia should be investing into research into carbon sequestration, into clean coal?
I think we need to look at all the major avenues of investment into research and development of green energy technologies. And personally, I probably think that clean coal is not actually going to get to be one of the main contributors, simply because it seems like it's going to be very hard to bring down the cost. Now, of course, we've been saying that with many other inventions that then later on turned out to be eminent innovations, and that's why I think we shouldn't be sitting here and saying, oh, I think we should pick this and this and this, and not all the others. Let's not pick winners, let's make sure we look at a broad range of these issues. And also, let's remember that China and India have lots of vast coal reserves. They're likely to be using many of these, and so that's certainly an argument in favor of looking at clean coal to be able to provide them with the technology that'll actually enable them to use the coal but not emit the CO2.
So why can't we put big investments into the technology and have an agreement as well that would have targets and bring emissions down? Why are they mutually exclusive?
Well, they're not mutually exclusive, but they certainly do impinge on each. No, let me start. They are mutually exclusive in the sense that if you spend a large sum of money on cutting carbon emissions, it means you buy the existing technology to cut back. That money is money that you can't put into research and development to get better technology for tomorrow. And likewise, if you put the money to better technology tomorrow, it means you can't cut down as much today. So there really is a trade-off, and I think we got to be honest about that.